welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D. I'm your host, Jessica, and joining us this week, we have a returning guest. We have Sam from Blinking Birch Games. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me back. I'm super excited.
Me too. I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about Death of the Author, which is currently live on BackerKit right now. I put links in the chat if you're watching live and in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast, also on the screen, so you can check that out whilst we're talking. And we are recording live today, so thank you for joining us live. And If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we will answer them, if we know the answers, which hopefully we will. But anyway, we will see. But Sam, you've been on the show before. It was in September 2022 when you were talking about your game Anamnesis, which was nominated for an Emmy Award, so congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And we talked then about your kind of background and history of games and stuff, but for those that haven't listened to that episode, could you give a little intro about kind of who you are and what you do with Blinking Birch Games?
Sure. So I'm a game designer, and I also edit games and do some freelance writing for other people's games. That has been mostly since we last talked, especially the editing. But yeah, I publish a bunch of different games under Blinking Birch Games, and primarily solo games, but a few other things as well.
Fantastic. And normally I ask people about like their background with RPGs and their history and stuff, but we kind of dove into that last time. So if people are curious, watch the previous episode on Anamnesis. So instead, I'm going to ask you what have been your gaming highlights since you were last on the show. So throughout 2023 and this year so far, any particular games that you've loved playing or any particular projects that have been really fun to launch?
Yeah, so I am currently GMing a campaign of Orbital Blues.
Nice.
It's really good. My primary game group, there's only 3 of us. So, we either all play as players or it's 1 GM and 2 players. We had like a 2-year-long Blades in the Dark campaign was our first one. And then we played a little bit of Monster of the Week, a little bit of Court of Blades, but now we're in Orbital Blues. And we're having a blast. I think we're like about 15 sessions in. And it's we're in it for the long haul. I'm expecting at least 2 years, if not longer. Highly recommended. It's really, really fun.
Sad Space Cowboys. We love that. We have had them on the show before, so if people are curious to learn more, there's an episode on Orbital Blues you can go in the back history for.
Highly recommend it. It's a really good like character focused game because we're very mechanics light players, and we find that the games that we enjoy the most are ones that the mechanics really help assist in character growth and development and relationships. And Orbital Blues is that in a way that we found that some other games weren't for us, even though we had a good time. So if that's your cup of tea, then definitely check that one out. That's the big one for sure in terms of highlights. Yep.
I love that as a highlight. And that we'll segue into talking about kind of what we're here to talk about Death of the Author. So you did mention you're more into the rules light sort of games, and I think that's fair to say. Is this something that's come through in your game design with Death of the Author as well?
Yeah, for sure. I really like zine-sized games. It's and Death of the Author is definitely meant to be rules light.
Fabulous. So for people that haven't heard of Death of the Author, could you give us a little intro as to what it's about?
Sure. So it's a single player game primarily, where you play as a character who is aware that they are a character in a story. And that story can be a novel, a D&D campaign, a movie, a radio show, and you are attempting to, through the course of the 5 chapters of the game, you attempt to gain more agency over your own actions and more control over the narrative of the story, while the entire time your author is kind of fighting against those changes. And at the end, you confront your author. So it's kind of about the relationship between this character and the author, and about what each is willing to do in order to shape the story the way that they want to.
So very introspective, very meta is one of the
Yes, very meta. Yeah.
So what was the inspiration for this? What made you want to kind of tell this story and help other people tell this story?
I personally really enjoy meta-ness in stories. I really like breaking the fourth wall. I find myself drawn to stories that do that. And so this is kind of my way of exploring that a bit. And it's also my way of exploring the question of what would a character and an author say if they could talk to each other? Because that's something that I think about sometimes. And I thought that kind of exploring it in game form would be an interesting idea. So
Yeah.
that's the big one.
Yeah.
I think that like especially when you're talking about it in context of the character is aware that they're a character. What would they say to their author about like what their story has been like and who they are, and how would they see their author knowing their story? How does that impact their perception of the author? So those were questions that I was hoping to explore with this game.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and I love how you said it can be a tabletop RPG character as well, because I think I have some characters that would be so annoyed with me because they'd be like, "Why did you give me this super sad backstory?"
Oh yeah, for sure, me too.
I think it's a really common thing when you make an RPG character. They just have this tragic backstory. It's like the common thing is how many are orphans and things like that, and you just think, why are you doing this? But yeah, so we're looking at the game in a mechanical way. I think we mentioned anamnesis before, which you were here previously to talk about, and this game is kind of a hack on that game.
Yeah.
So what are the key kind of changes that you did in this game to make it a hack of anamnesis?
Sure. So, Anamnesis and Death of the Author are games that both use tarot cards, and in fact, only use tarot cards, other than a way to like record your story, which could be through writing, through voice entries, whatever you want to do. So, in Anamnesis and Death of the Author, there are 5 acts. The first 4 acts being for each suit of the minor arcana. And then the 5th act being a little bit different and reserved for the major arcana. The kind of differences between them is they're both prompt based. So you draw a card from the minor arcana and then you look and see what the corresponding prompt is. But in Death of the Author, the prompts differ whether the card is upright or reversed. For those not familiar with tarot, reversed means that the card is basically upside down. And so the prompt changes just slightly depending on that. The other thing is that the character, in order to have more agency in the story and fight back against the narrative, they can change the prompt in certain ways. They have moves every chapter that they can do. So one of those is that, say that the card that you pulled is upright and you don't really love the prompt for upright. If your character is like, I don't like this, I don't want to do this, I don't want this to be my story, they can play something called a reversal, which reverses the card and gives you the separate prompt. The other thing that they can do is they can do something called a defiance, in which the like part of the prompt that changes depending on whether it's upright or reversed, you can, instead of picking one or the other, you can completely change it into something entirely different. And so you get like one of those per chapter. And it's the way for the character to put their own twists on the story. So that's like the big one. There's some different stuff with major arcana too, with the major arcana relating more to the author themselves. But the big one is the reversal defiance aspect, which is not an anamnesis.
What's interesting about this game is it's a solo game, but am I right in saying you're almost playing 2 characters in the game, because you're playing the character in the story, and then you're playing the character of the author. So that must feel different, because most solo games I know you're playing one character and you're kind of going through as that. How does that change the solo gaming experience when you're trying to be 2 different people?
I think it's definitely very meta in that way. It's interesting in the fact that like you're playing from the perspective of the character, but like you said, you are technically also playing the author. So all of the stuff that the author is like doing in their story to the character, that is you also writing that. So I think it changes the I think one of the ways it kind of changes the gameplay is it kind of puts it puts a lot of the like pushback for the character, a lot of like the obstacles for the character also in the player's hands. in a way that, at least I hope, feels natural, where you kind of do have prompts that you can work with, but the exact nature of that and the exact nature of how the author kind of twists some of those is in your hands, as the author.
Okay.
So it kind of also gives you a chance of being like, of shaping this kind of antagonist of the author in whatever way you wish to. So you can play it as like extremely antagonistic, and like the game says, like death of the author. It can be a pretty brutal confrontation at the end. But you could also play it in a way where they are like circling around each other, or they want some sort of similar things, but there's just slight differences where that relationship is a lot more complicated. So the kind of like intensity of that and that conflict is also in the hands of the player. So I think that it kind of gives the opportunity to kind of play at like a level of emotional intensity that you want to. But I think that can be said for a lot of solo games too, especially with journaling games, where you can kind of be as intense as you want in your writing.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I was thinking of is you mentioned at the beginning the character being written about in the story will always confront the author at the end. And does the confrontation have to be antagonistic? Because one thing I kind of thought was a friend of mine is a romance author, and they said how when they're writing a character, they kind of have to fall in love with them a little bit when they're writing them to make it. So could it be that there's a romantic connection between the character and the author?
That option's not written out of the game. It's been considered by me before. So it's definitely possible. It could be romantic. It could even be thankful in ways. It could be it could be really anything you want it to be. The game sets it up as it kind of guides a little bit more into more of an antagonistic, based on the kind of idea of this character fighting for control and the author kind of pushing back. But technically, in terms of like the mechanics of the game, you could play that relationship however you wanted. So yeah, it definitely allows for that option.
Fantastic. So it's like you say, quite a flexible toolkit. So it's not a specific setting. You can do kind of whatever. So how have you written the prompts or tried to make the game, directive enough that it gives the person some guidance, but flexible enough that it could be open to whatever interpretation people want to take from it? How do you approach writing like that?
It was tricky for this game, but fun. I basically, the first 4 chapters bring you through kind of like a storyline. So the first chapter is kind of like the backstory, the prologue, and then you have like the beginning, middle, end of the story. So in order to do that, there's like certain there's an escalation as that you progress through the chapters, as like the stakes get higher, and the prompts get more serious, I guess, more heavy. They're given more weight as you continue into the story. And so, but they have to be like specific enough that the character has reason to change them. So one of the things that, like, as you mentioned, it's not a particular genre or setting. When I first started writing this game, I had some genre prompts in there so that, maybe a prompt would be like, you find a door that leads to another world, or there's like an alien running around. But I eventually ditched those because originally I was thinking like, oh, well, maybe this is a way to have the author like try to bring the story into a certain genre, and then the character can like decide whether or not they want that. But then I was like, well, the author is also writing a narrative, and I think that that's important too, is that as the author, you're trying to make a coherent story. And so and part of your struggle as the author is that the character is like tweaking things in that story. So eventually I kind of did away with the more genre specific prompts in order to kind of favor allowing the author to tell a more streamlined story. But the prompts are also kind of vague enough that you could do it in a sci-fi, fantasy, horror setting, and the prompts should still work for that. And then the other thing is that I also, in order to like help hit those story beats,
Mhm.
I was like on TV tropes, just and like did a lot of
Okay.
thinking about like what are common story beats that happen like in the
Sure.
middle of a story, at the beginning, at the end. So while still being kind of open enough to be flexible for the genre. And so
Mhm.
I remember at one point just like looking at lists on TV tropes about, you know, what are like really common story endings, and kind of
Mhm.
pulling some inspiration from that. And then just like thinking about what I read and
Mhm.
what are common themes throughout those. So those also show up as prompts throughout the game.
Fabulous. Do you have some examples of some of the prompts that we could kind of talk through and get some ideas of things?
Sure. So one of them in like the first chapter, which is like the backstory chapter,
Mhm.
is you so the I think the upright one is you witness a historical moment. That could be a, you know, depending on the genre and the setting, that could be like an actual thing from our real history. It could be something invented from a fictional history, anything like that. But the character at some point in their past witnessed something very historical. And the reverse of that, the flipped card, is you bear witness to an act of violence.
Okay.
So the prompt is similar. There are words. Part of the sentence is the same, but then there's this piece of it that's different. So in this case, it's a historical moment or an act of
Mhm.
violence. The character can then, you know, if they got an act of violence, let's say, maybe they're like,
Mhm.
I don't know that I love that. I would rather see a historical moment. So they can spend
Yeah.
their reversal to reverse it to the other prompt.
Mhm.
Or if they don't like either of those, then they can use their defiance to write something else in there. And that could be you bear witness to like a tornado or a lovely parade
Yeah.
or really anything that your character
Yeah.
would want to write in there. Um,
Mhm.
but then if you do change the prompt, so let's say that the character was like, I just want to see a lovely parade. I'm going to spend my defiance, and
Mhm.
I'm going to write in here and say that, no, I don't. I reject both of these options.
Mhm.
I'm using my influence over the story to watch this parade.
Mhm.
What happens next is the author takes a major arcana card. You draw a major arcana
Mhm.
card for the author to see how they respond / retaliate to this.
Mhm.
So the major arcana kind of provides inspiration for like what the author does in this scene, because
Okay.
even though you as the character are making changes to the
Mhm.
plot, the author is still the one writing the story, and so they can write this parade kind of however they want. um, so it's kind of and that major arcana card can inform like how they might
Mhm.
write about this parade. Do they kind of like let you have a pleasant day, or does something dramatic happen during the parade? Is it, you know, what type of parade is it? That kind of is the stuff that's
Sure.
in the author's hands still. So they can
Yeah.
kind of like let it slide, or they can like take your words and twist them.
So interestingly, it's almost like the very yes and thing that you would do in a group tabletop RPG when you're doing a collaborative storytelling. Like, sure, the GM's running the game, so the players can throw things in, but ultimately the game master is going to react and do those things. So it's interesting that the writing of the book is almost echoes like a collaborative, not solo TTRPG. So that's
I
an interesting
never
element.
thought about that.
Yeah,
That's that's correct. That's
yeah.
great. That's
I
yeah,
just
I
thought of
hadn't
it
really
in a meta
considered that.
element. But yeah,
Mhm.
and speaking of non-solo games, I noticed on the crowdfunding page on the back of kit, you do have a variant for a two-player version.
Mhm.
How does that change things kind of mechanically, and also how does that change things with the feel and the tone of the game?
Sure. So I'm still working out the specific rules for the
Okay.
two-player variant, but some of the stuff that I'm playing around with is instead of um, the player who's, you know, if you're single player, you're playing it from the perspective of the character. So
Sure.
in that case, you randomly draw cards in order to get the scene prompts, because
Mhm.
it's like the author is giving you those prompts. You don't have control over which prompts
Sure.
you're getting. So in the two-player version, what I'm leaning towards is that one person is playing the character, the other person is playing the author, and the author, instead of like drawing those scene prompts can essentially like look at their list of prompts and be like, this is the scene that I want to write. And can like choose one from the list and tell the character player that this is the scene. And then the character player would get the chance to say, okay, that scene works for me, or to defy or reverse it. And then if they choose to defy or reverse it, then the person playing the author can still draw a tarot card to see how they respond, but then it's up to the author player in order to kind of narrate how that goes. And I think that there's going to be a little bit more collaboration in explaining this scene. So I like the idea of maybe when the prompt is first pulled, the author kind of gives a very brief summary of what they imagine this might be. And then the character can say, I like that, or I don't. I want this instead, and kind of describe a little bit of what they like. And then the author can be like, oh, well, this is how the author tweaks that. So a little bit more back and forth on the story building itself. And a little bit more choice, especially from the author's perspective, in terms of like what they're writing.
I love that you're exploring a 2-player version of it, because I think I know there's some people that are hesitant to try kind of solo tabletop RPGs, and I'm thinking playing this as a 2-player variant to kind of draw someone in and get them into the game and be like, and now if you enjoyed that, you can take it and try it on your own. I think that would be my sneaky way to try and get someone into solo tabletop RPGs if they haven't tried them before. So we talked a bit about it's live currently on BackerKit as we speak, and congratulations, because it's funded several times over now and you're smashing through all the stretch goals, so congratulations. But where is the project at? So if people see this and they're interested in backing, click the link. When are they going to get copies of the game, and what stage of development is the timeline on?
Sure. So currently it's the beta version of the game has been written, the kind of playtest version. I've gotten playtest feedback on it, which has been great. And so I'm kind of in the stage right now of using that feedback and refining it, building out those other couple of sections like the 2-player version. And then the art is almost complete. It's pretty close to being done already, actually. Which is all done by Victor Winter, who's phenomenal. He also did the art for Anamnesis. And then James Hanna is working on the layout, and we're chatting right now. He's been sending me different samples. He also is the one who came up with the lettering for the title. I'm trying to point the right direction.
Yeah, you're pointing, correct.
Yeah. Which I just love how that looks. So he's working on the layout right now, and then it's going to be edited by Mark Shepard, who also edited Anamnesis. I really like Mark's work. They do a great job. So that's the team. But right now I'm refining the rules to get a solid draft ready for Mark's, who we're planning will be starting to edit in next month in June. And then James will be working on the layout in June. And by around like July, August is when we want to kind of have a test print. And so we're giving ourselves like a month buffer too, just in case we need some extra time. But we're hoping to have games shipped. I think it's October.
Oh wow.
Is the so fairly quick timeline. But it's fairly far in development already. And it's like a zine, so it's a little bit easier in terms of it's not an 100-page book. So so we're aiming around October at least to start shipping things out to people.
Right. So maybe it's good something to get for somebody as a Christmas gift, just as an idea, because it'll be there in time. But yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. I think my internet just cut out. Am I back?
Oh, you're back. Yes.
Great. Okay. Sorry about that. One thing I was going to ask about is it sounds like you're partnering with people that you've worked with a lot before in the past, which is awesome. Your last crowdfunding campaign, was that on the Kickstarter platform? Is that right?
Yes, it was.
And now this one is on BackerKit. So I was just wondering why you decided to try a different platform, and have you noticed any major differences with them?
Sure. Mostly so there's a couple of reasons why I moved to BackerKit. The big one is that I don't love everything that Kickstarter's been doing recently. I care very deeply about not using AI generated materials in projects. And BackerKit has a much better policy on that than Kickstarter does, which means a lot to me. Like is something that is a big reason for the change. But then also there's just been a couple of things that BackerKit has done that Kickstarter has done over the past couple of years that left a sour taste in my mouth. BackerKit is, in terms of their crowdfunding, much newer. But they have been around for a while in terms of the pledge manager that is used for projects. And when I crowdfunded Anamnesis on Kickstarter, I did use their pledge manager, and I had a great time with it. It's a weird way to say it. It went smoothly. It went great.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it was such a party.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's so exciting.
The SKU fields and the links. It was great. Yeah.
So I already had a good impression based on that. And then so far it's gone really well on BackerKit. I really like how this might change as the platform grows, but right now they are actually pretty like one-on-one with creators. So there's like a person who was, essentially like assigned my project and who like reaches out to me and who I know that I can ask questions to. And it's like nice I've like had a video call with him before. So it feels a little bit more personal, which is nice. I like what BackerKit has been doing more than I've liked what Kickstarter has been doing. In terms of the funding, so far it's going well. With that said, I also my audience for my work has grown a lot since Anamnesis. So it's like there's kind of a balance there too. But yeah, I mean, I so far I've had a positive experience with BackerKit. So it's going.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And again, I'll just plug that link for anyone watching. Links in the show notes if you're listening. Because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So if any of this has been interesting to you, please do go check it out. If you're able to support, do, and if you're not, then just share it. Is another fun thing you can do.
That's super helpful in general.
We're coming up to the end of our kind of time. So is there anything about the game that you want to kind of make sure we shout out, or is there any kind of closing summary words you want to leave people with about it?
I think the only other thing to mention is that, like you mentioned, so far it's funded, which is great. So it's definitely happening. So there's, I think we have one stretch goal left, which is that Victor is going to, if we hit that goal, Victor will be making like another piece of artwork, which will be a character, a piece of character art for the author, or like an author, which I'm really excited about because Victor really specializes in character work. So that's kind of what we're reaching for right now. But yeah, that's basically it. I think everything else has been pretty summarized.
Perfect.
It's been an exciting project.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to see it going well. So congratulations to you. One final question, which I always ask at the end, is do you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs? And the rule is it can't be a game that you've made, and it can't be, of course, D&D.
Great. I have so many, but Great. The one that I'll say is I just played Insatiable Cravings by Jay Stroutman, which is a 2-player game. It's like it's a game where 2 players hide their intentions until the very end. One player is the monster, and one player is the admirer who is like making a meal for the monster. And at the end, you decide like, are they going to betray each other or not? Is the monster going to try to eat the admirer? Is the admirer going to try to poison the monster? If so, who's successful? Do they not? Do they get each other? And that is, and it takes place over like 3 scenes, three acts. It's so much fun. It's so good. Highly recommend it. I was tense in the last scene. So it definitely is suspenseful in like it. Yeah, just really well designed. Highly recommend. A lot of fun.
Perfect. What was the name of that one again? It was
Insatiable Cravings.
Insatiable Cravings. Lovely. Maybe that's a guest for me to have on in the future.
Oh yeah.
To know that.
Jay's great.
Fab. Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time. So, Sam, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's always nice to see people come back and doing new projects and stuff. So maybe in the future, in another year and a half's time, you can be back on telling us about the next game that you're doing.
Let's hope so. That'd be great. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, great. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you very much for watching the show. We'll be back next week talking about other indie tabletop RPGs to share with you. Yeah. So for now, that's all. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.